everyone, hello my students. Today we will study the second lesson, complex numbers. What are complex numbers? Complex numbers. First guys, we will define the imaginary number. The imaginary number is a number whose square equals -1. That's mean I squared equals 1 and I equals the root of -1. For example guys, the root of -5 we can write it as now root 5i. Root of -7 we can write it as root 7i. By the same way, root -13 it will be root 13i. But root of -20 guys, we can write it as root 20 times I. But root 20 we can simplify as 2 root 5. Now it will be 2 root 5 times I. It's read 2 root 5i. Note guys, we studied before that root 5 times root 3 equals root 3 times 5 equals root 15. But root -1 times root -1 is not equal root -1 times -1. We can write it as root -1 times root -1. It will be I times I. Just add the two powers. It will be I squared. I squared equals what? I told you before, equals -1. That's mean guys, if A and B are two non-positive numbers. Non-positive means what? Means 0 or negative. So root A times root B is not equal root A times B. We can write it as root AB. Pay attention. Integer power of I raised to the power 1 equals I, but I raised to the power 2 we studied before equals -1. But how can we find I raised to the power 3 or I cubed? We can write it as I squared times I raised to the power 1. But I squared equals what? Yes, equals -1 times I raised to the power 1. We can write it as -I. So don't forget, I cubed equals -1 in the simplest form. Now I raised to the power 4, we can write it as by the same way I squared times I squared. But I squared equals what? Equals 1. Or equals -1, sorry. So I raised to the power 4 equals -1 times -1 equals 1. Now guys, I raised to the power 4 equals 1. But how can we find I raised to the power 5? Yes, it will be I raised to the power 4 times I raised to the power 1. It will be 1 times I equals what guys? Yes, equals I. Pay attention guys, if the index is divisible by 4, so the result it will be 1. For example guys, I raised to the power 4, it will be 1. This is the main idea. I raised to the power 8, it will be 1. I raised to the power 12, it will be 1. I raised to the power -16, it will be 1. Why? -16 is divisible by 4. So if the power is divisible by 4, so the result it will be 1. So I will repeat the same values. I, -1, -I, and 1. Don't forget. For example guys, I raised to the power 6, it will be repeated. We can write it as -1. I raised to the power 7, it will be -I. But I raised to the power 8 equals what I said before. If the index is divisible by 4, so the result it will be 1. Now I raised to the power 8 equals what? Yes, 1. Why guys? Because 8 is divisible by 4. Now we can summary in this table. Is very important, you must study it. The number and its simplest form. I raised to the power 1 equals I raised to the power 2 equals -1. I raised to the power 3 we studied before equals -1. Now I raised to the power 4 equals 1. We will repeat the same values. I, -1, -I, and 1. Don't forget guys. From I raised to the power 5 equals what? Yes, equals I. It's repeated. I raised to the power 6 equals what? -1. I raised to the power 7 equals what? Equals -I. It's repeated. Finally, I raised to the power 8 equals what? 1. Don't forget, if the power is divisible by 4, so the result it will be 1. In general, now we can say that I raised to the power 4n equals 1. I raised to the power 4n plus 1. The remainder will be 1. Now equals I raised to the power 1 equals I. I raised to the power 4n plus 2. It will be I raised to the power 2 equals -1. I raised to the power 4n plus 3 equals -I, and so on. Don't forget, n is what guys? Is an integer number. For example guys, find in the simplest form. Number 1, I raised to the power 24. 24 is divisible by 4 guys. Now I raised to the power 24 is equivalent to I raised to the power 0 equals 1. Number 2 guys, I raised to the power 37. How can we find it? It's easy, just multiply it by 1 and we can write 1 as I raised to the power negative 36 guys, because 36 is divisible by 4. Now I raised to the power 37 equals I raised to the power 37 minus 36. 37 minus 36 equals 1. Now equals I raised to the power 1 equals I. By the same way, I raised to the power negative 43, just multiply it by 1, it will be the same. But we can write 1 as I raised to the power. This power is divisible by 4. What is the closest number to 43 and divisible by 4? You have to find number greater than 43 and make it positive. It will be 44. Now we can write I raised to the power negative 43 as I raised to the power negative 43 plus 44 guys. Negative 43 plus 44 equals what? Equals 1. Now I raised to the power negative 43 equals I raised to the power 1 equals I. I raised to the power negative 51 by the same way equals I raised to the power negative 51 plus 52. 52 is divisible by 4 guys. So we can add the two indices, negative 51 plus 52 equals 1. It will be I raised to the power 1 equals I. Number 5 guys, I raised to the power 4n plus 29 is equivalent to I raised to the power 29 equals I raised to the power 29 minus 28 guys. Don't forget guys, I raised to the power negative 28 equals 1. Now equals I raised to the power 1 equals I. Finally guys, I raised to the power 4n plus 42 equals I raised to the power 42. We can write it as equals I raised to the power 42 minus 40. By the same way, it will be I squared. I squared equals what guys? Yes, equals negative 1. Let's have another example. Find in the simplest form. I raised to the power 66 guys. We can write it as, what is the closest number to 66 and divisible by 4? It will be 64. 64 divided by 4 equals 16. Now we can write I raised to the power 66, I raised to the power 66 minus 64. 66 minus 64 equals 2. Now it will be I squared. I squared equals what? In the simplest form equals negative 1. By the same way, I raised to the power negative 45. We can write it as I raised to the power 45 plus 48 now guys. Now we have the index is positive. It will be I raised to the power 3 I cubed equals what? Equals negative I. Number 3 guys, I raised to the power 4n plus 2 is equivalent to I squared. I squared equals what? Negative 1. I raised to the power 4n minus 1. It will be I raised to the power negative 1. We can write it as I raised to the power negative 1 as I raised to the power negative 1 times 1. We can write 1 as what guys? I raised to the power 4. Then we can add the two powers. It will be I raised to the power negative 1 plus 4. It will be I raised to the power 3. I cubed equals what? Yes, equals negative I, like number 2 by the way. Number 5, I raised to the power 100n minus 15 is equivalent to I raised to the power negative 15. We can write it as I raised to the power negative 15 plus 16. It will be I raised to the power 1 equals I in the simplest form. Number 6 guys, I raised to the power 4n minus 9 is equivalent to I raised to the power negative 9. Now guys, we can add 12. It will be I raised to the power negative 9 plus 12. It will be I raised to the power 3 I cubed equals what guys? Yes, equals negative I. Now the set of complex numbers. The complex number is written in the form z equals a plus bi guys. A is called what? Is a real number. bi is called what? Is imaginary number. For example guys, the numbers 3 plus 4i, 2 plus 8i, 5 minus I are complex numbers. So we have two parts. The first part is called real part. The second part is called imaginary part. Don't forget guys, this is called the complex number. Example guys, solve for x. How can we find the solution of the equation x squared plus x plus 1 equals 0. It will be complex numbers. First guys, by using what? Yes, general formula. Write a, b and c. A is what guys? Is the coefficient of x squared equals 1. B is called the coefficient of x, it will be 1. C is the absolute value. The general formula x equals negative b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac over 2a. We studied before. Now substitute in the relation x equals negative 1 plus or minus root of b squared, b equals 1, so I write 1, minus 4ac, 4 times 1 times 1, it will be minus 4. Pay attention guys, 1 minus 4, it will be negative 3. We studied before that root negative 3 is not a real number, so the solution set it will be 5. But we can find here a solution by using the complex numbers. We can write it root negative 3 as root 3i. Now we can write it as x equals negative 1 plus or minus root 3i over 2. Now the two roots, it will be x equals negative 1/2 plus guys root 3 over 2i, and x equals negative 1/2 minus root 3 over 2i. By the same way, number 2, 4x squared plus 100 equals 75. It's easy now. Just move 100 to the other side to be subtracted. We get 4x squared equals 75 minus 100. 75 minus 100, it will be negative number, equals negative 25. Divided both sides by 4, we get x squared equals negative 25 over 4. By taking the square root, now x equals positive or negative. The square root of negative 25 over 4 means what? Means the square root of 25 over 4 times I, guys. We studied before. Now we can write it as what, guys? We can write it as 5 over 2 times I, taking the square root. Now the two roots are x equals 5 over 2i square root and x equals negative root 5 over 2i. So we have the two complex numbers, or the values of x are complex numbers. So we can solve now the equation for x squared plus 100 equals 75 in complex numbers. Operations on complex numbers. The operations are adding and subtracting, multiplication and division. For example, simplify. Add the two complex numbers 2 plus 3i and second 3 minus 5i. Just add the two real part with the two imaginary part. 2 plus 3 equals what? Equals 5. And 3i plus negative 5i, guys. Just collect the like terms. Negative 5 plus 3, it will be negative 2. Now the summation, it will be 5 minus 2i in the simplest form. By the same way, we have here 2 plus 3i minus 3 minus 5i. Just use the distribution property. We can say that 2 minus 3, it will be negative 1 as a real part, and 3i minus negative 5, it will be 3i plus 5i, it will be 8i. Now in the simplest form equals negative 1 plus 8i. But in multiplication, how can we find 2 plus 3i times 3 minus 5i? By using distribution property, guys. We get 2 times 3 minus 5i plus 3i times 3 minus 5i. We will use distribution property again. 2 times 3 equals what? Equals 6. 2 times negative 5i, it will be negative 10i. Plus 3i times 3 equals 9i, minus, guys, 3i times 5i equals 15 times I squared, don't forget. But the value of I squared equals what? Equals negative 1. Now we can substitute. It will be negative 1 times negative 15 equals 15. Now guys, collect like terms. 15 plus 6 equals what? Equals 21. Negative 10i plus 9i equals negative I. It will be 21 minus I in the simplest form. Finally guys, 3 minus I times 3 plus I. It's easy now. The difference between two amounts times the sum of two amounts, the same two amounts. So square the first amount minus square the second amount. It will be 3 squared minus I squared. 3 squared minus I squared. 3 squared equals what? Equals 9. minus I squared equals negative 1 times negative, guys, it will be positive 1. Now 9 plus 1 equals 10. The equality of two complex numbers. Suppose we have two complex numbers. The first one is a plus bi, the second one is c plus di. The two complex numbers are equal if and only if a equals c, means the real part at the first equals the real part at the second, and imaginary part at the first equals the imaginary part at the second, means b equals d. But if we have two equal complex numbers are equal, we will deduce that the real part equals real part, imaginary part equals imaginary part. For example, guys, he said complete. If 3 minus 5i equals a minus bi, then a equals what? B equals what? So a, the real part, equals the real part. So a equals what? Equals 3. And imaginary part equals the imaginary part. Negative 5i equals negative bi. We can divide both sides by negative 1. We can get 5i equals bi. By comparing, we can deduce that b equals 5. Let's have an example now. Find the value of x and y in the following. Number 1, 2x plus 1 plus 4yi equals 5 minus 12i. First, guys, we will equate the two real numbers. Now we can get 2x plus 1 equals 5. This is the first equation. Equate the imaginary numbers. 4y equals what, guys? Yes, equals negative 12. This is the second. From 1 we can find x easily. Just move 1 to the other side to be subtracted. We can get 2x equals 5 minus 1. 2x equals 4. Divide both sides by 2, guys. We can get x equals 2. From 2 we can say 4y equals negative 12. Divide both sides by 4. The coefficient of y. We can get y equals negative 12 divided by 4 equals negative 3. By the same way, number 2, 2x minus 3 equals what, guys? Equals 7. This is the first equation. The second equation, 3y plus 1 equals negative 10. From number 1, guys, or from the equation 1, just move 3 to the other side to be added. We can get 2x equals 10. Dividing both sides by 2, we can get x equals 5. By the same way, from equation 2, 3y plus 1 equals 10. Move 1 to the other side to be subtracted. Now, negative 10 minus 1 is equals what? Yes, equals negative 11. Divide both sides by 3. Now y equals negative 11 over 3. Conjugate numbers, guys. We studied before last year. The two numbers, guys, a plus bi and a minus bi, are called what? Two conjugate numbers. For example, guys, they are the same but different in the middle sign. Number and its conjugate. For example, 2 plus 3i. Its conjugate is 2 minus 3i. The same but different in sign. 5 minus 2i. Its conjugate 5 plus 2i. 3i. Its conjugate, guys, negative 3i. For example, guys, if the first is 5 plus 3i, its conjugate, it will be 5 minus 3i. Don't forget, guys, they are different in the middle sign. For example, guys, the first one 2 plus 3i, the second one it will be 2 minus 3i. We can find the following: the sum 2 plus 3i plus the second it will be 2 minus 3i. We can simplify 3i with negative 3i cancelled. Now 2 plus 2 equals 4. Don't forget, guys, 4 is what? Yes, is real number, but the product it will be 2 plus 3i times 2 minus 3i. Now sum times the difference, it will be the square of the first minus the square of the second. It will be 4 minus 9i squared, but we studied before that i squared equals negative 1. Now negative 1 times negative 9 equals 9. Now the product it will be 4 plus 9 equals 13. 13 is what, guys? Is real number. We can find the difference easily. The first 2 plus 3i minus the second 2 minus 3i. We can deduce by using distribution property equals 2 plus 3i minus 2 plus 3i. We can now simplify Negative 2 cancelled with positive 2. 3i plus 3i equals 6i. Collect like terms. For example, guys, find in the simplest form. Number 1, 4 minus 6i over 2i. Just multiply the fraction by the conjugate of the denominator, guys. It will be negative 20i. Up and down, we can say that 4 minus 6i times negative 2i by using here distribution property. Over down we have 2i times negative 2i, negative 4i squared. Now use distribution property. We get negative 8i plus 12i squared over negative I squared. I squared, guys, equals what? Equals negative 1 times negative 4. It will be 4. Pay attention, guys. I squared up equals negative 1. We can write it as negative 8i minus 12 over 4. Now we can write it as negative 8 divided by 4 equals what? Equals negative 2i. Negative 12 divided by 4 equals negative 3. In the simplest form equals negative 2i minus 3. Second, by the same way, we can multiply up and down by the conjugate of the bottom number. It will be 3 plus 2i. By using distribution property, we can write it as 26 times 3 plus 20i. Don't use distribution property here. Why, guys? Because down we have number and its conjugate. Just square the first minus square the second amount. Now it will be 9 minus 4i squared. I squared equals what? Equals negative 1. We can write it as negative 1 times negative 4 equals positive 4. 9 plus 4 equals what? Equals 13. Now 26 is divisible by 13 equals what? Equals 2. Now we can write it as 2 times 3 plus 2i. By the same way, we can use distribution property here. We can write it as 2 times 3 equals 6 plus 4i in the simplest form. Number 3, 3 minus I over 2 minus I. Multiplying by the conjugate, we can get 3 minus I times 2 plus I. We can say that 6 plus 3i minus 2i minus I squared over 4 minus I squared. Don't forget, guys, I squared equals 1. Substitute, it will be 6 plus I plus 1 over 4 minus I squared. It will be 4 plus 1, guys. Now we have 7 plus I over 5. We can write it as 7 over 5 plus 1 over 5i. Finally, multiplying by 5 plus 2i up and down, we can write it as 15 plus 6i plus 20i plus 8i squared by using distribution property over 25 minus 4i squared. Don't forget, guys, square the first minus square the second amount. 4i squared, guys, I squared equals negative 1. So substitute up and down. It will be 15 plus 6i plus 20i minus 8. Because I squared equals negative 1. Negative 1 times 8, it will be negative 8. Over 25 plus 4, guys, by the way. 25 plus 4 equals 29. It will be, now collect like terms, 6i plus 20i equals 26i. 15 minus 8 equals 7. We can write it as 7 plus 26i over 25 plus 4. It will be 29. Now, guys, we can write it as 7 over 29 plus 26 over 29i. Let's have another example. Find the value of x and y if x plus yi equals 2 plus I times 2 minus I over 3 plus 2i. The first step, guys, is simplify the right hand side multiplying by the conjugate of 3 plus 2i. Up and down, we can get 4 minus I squared. Why, guys? Because 2 plus I times 2 minus I equals 4 minus I squared directly times 3 minus 2i. Down, guys, just we will square the first amount, which is 3. It will be 9 minus the square of the second. It will be 2i squared. It will be 4i squared. Now, guys, I squared equals what? Equals 1. Now substitute I squared equals 1 up and down. It will be 4 plus 1 equals 5 times 3 minus 2i over 9 plus 4. Now guys, it will be 5 times 3 minus 2i over 9 plus 4 equals 13. By using distribution property, we can get 5 times 3 equals 15 minus 10i over 13. Guys, now we can substitute in the first relation, which is x plus yi equals what guys? 15 over 3 minus 10 over 13i. Now we can deduce that x equals 15 over 13 and y equals what guys? Yes, negative 10 over 13. Now we can deduce the value of x and the value of y. Let's have another example guys. He said solve for x raised to the power 4 minus 16 equals 0. We can use factorization guys. It will be x squared minus 4 times x squared plus 4 equals 0. But we can use factorization again. The expression x squared minus 4, we can factorize it as x plus 2 times x minus 2. Now we can get x plus 2 times x minus 2 times x squared plus 4 equals 0. From the first x plus 2 equals 0, we can deduce that x equals negative 2. By the same way guys, x minus 2 equals 0, now x equals 2. But x squared plus 4 equals 0. Just move 4 to the other side to be subtracted. We can get x squared equals negative 4. By taking the square root of both sides, we can get x equals plus or minus radical negative 4 guys. Radical negative 4, we can write it as what guys? 2i. Now x equals negative 2i and x equals positive 2i. Now the values of x are x equals negative 2, x equals 2, x equals negative 2i, and x equals 2i. Second example, he said simplify the expression 1 minus I raised to the power 4. We can write it 4 as 2 times 2. So we can write the expression 1 minus I raised to the power 4 as 1 minus I squared all squared guys. Now we can find the expansion of the expression 1 minus I L squared. Just square the first, it will be 1. Square the last one, it will be plus I squared. Minus 2 times 1 times negative I, it will be minus 2I. Now all squared guys, but I squared equals what guys? Equals negative 1. So substitute I squared equals 1. So it will be 1 minus 1 minus 2I all squared. Minus 1 minus 1 equals what? Equals 0. It will be negative 2i all squared. Now we can square negative 2, it will be 4i squared, but I squared equals what? Equals negative 1. Now the expression equals negative 4. Finally, if you like my video, subscribe to my channel for more math videos. Thanks for watching. See you soon guys.